is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm Dakota Arsenault, and today is a very special episode. We have a video interview with Sook-Yin Lee, the director of the Canadian film Paying for It. Now, what makes this episode doubly extra special, other than the fantastic interview that you're about to hear, I said it's video, which means if you listen to the show on Spotify or on YouTube, you'll be able to see Sook-Yin Lee talk about her own movie. I, unfortunately, am not the one conducting the interview. My co-host, Jeff Bulmer, who you also know from the podcast Classic Movies Live, he is the one that is conducting this interview. So what you're going to hear is we're going to cut to audio of Jeff introducing the interview, and then it's going to go right back to the video portion of both Jeff and Sook-Yin Lee talking about Paying for It. What I'm really excited about is the fact that Paying for It is actually setting a record for being the most reviewed film on ContraZoomPod.com because Jeff originally reviewed it out of TIFF 2 years ago. Pierre Fragon reviewed it out of VIFF that same year, and now that the movie is getting distribution in the States, we're having a review from Ryan Beaupit as well that will be coming out a few days after this interview launches, but I'll make sure I go back and re-edit the show notes so you can check out all of those reviews as well. And let me give you a little spoiler alert: everyone loves this movie. If you have not seen Paying for It yet, I highly recommend it. But you're going to hear Jeff and Sook-Yin talk about it, and Jeff wax very poetically about how much he loves this film. So please enjoy these interviews.
On today's episode, we have a very special interview with Sook-Yin Lee, the director of the movie Paying for It. If you are a regular reader of the website or a regular listener of the show, you may remember Paying for It as being one of my personal favorites from TIFF last year, 2 years ago, and a major player at the Canadian Screen Awards last year. On January 30th, Paying for It will officially get its release in the United States. Sook-Yin Lee actually talks quite a bit more about that near the end of the interview. It's a very interesting rollout that they've got, and I'm very excited for it. I'm excited for you to hear the whole interview. This is a really interesting one. We go over sort of, how this movie came to be, how, Sook-Yin adapted her own life into this movie, and how she found a few of the actors who really broke out in this film. With that, I am going to turn it over to myself and Sook-Yin Lee. I hope you enjoy this interview. Hello, welcome to ContraZoom Pod. My name is Jeff Bulmer, and I am here today with an interview with director Sook-Yin Lee of Paying for It. Sook-Yin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me.
So this movie is releasing on January 30th in the States, but it released last year here in Canada, I believe for a limited release. I think it's on Crave, and it was an official selection at the 2024 Toronto International Film Festival. So with that whole timeline, I just wanted to ask, how's it been living with this film for the last year and a half?
Oh, wonderful. I mean, I've been living with it for the better part of the last decade trying to write it. And then, of course, there's the production of it that is, you work very hard for years to get it right on page. And then you have financing, and then they say you have 19 days to shoot it. So there's a lot of quick thinking there. And then you have, the months later to edit it. I was really, really pleased with it, how it turned out. It got into TIFF, and I started to tour it. It got into many festivals. I brought it to festivals, and it's a really kind of like grassroots undertaking. And we decided to, after the festival circuit, where I brought it to Europe, Argentina, the States for a few festivals. When it came to the theatrical release, instead of going through like the usual customers, the distributors, big distributors. We didn't have that option, so decided to borrow a tear a page from my life as a musician and took it on the road like a touring band.
Mhm.
And so took the movie all over the place, like a circus sideshow. So Chester and I, and oftentimes just me solo, would show up. We would do signings, sell T-shirts, CDs, posters, you name it, and then have really lively Q&As that oftentimes resembled town halls. There's a lot of ideas in the movie that, you know, people would go in another direction, a related idea, and it was a lot of fun, and it was sort of fostering this new kind of manner of bringing your movie to people. And instead of, like, I've had my movies in the past be distributed by big corporate players, but they stuff it in a kind of chain mall and no one's there.
Mhm.
So this kind of style was more like people are showing up, they know it's an event, they know it's a movie, they know it's good because it got into TIFF, and then it also won 2 Canadian Screen Awards, for Best Adapted Screenplay and also cinematography, and it won a Best Lead for an actor award for Emily
Wait,
Lang. So it's
did
like,
Emily Lay win that one?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was SAG-AFTRA in the West Coast,
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
and she's from Vancouver, originally. And so, yeah, it swept up a lot. And through just word of mouth, we literally had a poster campaign like a band. Dylan Gamble, who wrote the score with me, also did an incredible job postering the city. And so a lot of people ended up seeing it. And it went really well. So now I'm positioned to we it's very hard to get distribution in the States, but somehow we got it with an excellent art house film distributor, Film Movement, and we're opening it up in New York and Los Angeles, and I was just told today Chicago.
Wow.
So Chester and I are going down, and sort of like, it's a little bit unnerving because of what's happening there. I hope I don't get disappeared, but I feel that it's really imperative that we bring the film to our American friends because I think it's a big warm hug.
And I
I'm
think
very
it's one
excited to
that's
bring it there.
I think it's one that's really important to see because it talks about a lot of issues that I don't know, maybe there's more important things in the world, but like this is just stuff that doesn't get talked about a lot. Um I think that like the way that this movie talks about and incorporates sex worker stories is just something that you know, I mean, I guess maybe I'm guilty of it too because I just said I don't know, maybe there's more important things to talk about in the world. Like it's something that gets minimized quite a bit if it gets talked about at all. And I think that it's an important thing to for people to see. I think it's an important movie for people to see.
Well, I was hanging out with David Cronenberg the other day. We went for lunch, and I said, "The world is in disarray, kind of like 1968, isn't it, David?" And he said, "Yes, only worse, coming from somebody as a young guy who lived through it."
Mhm.
In 1968, the world was on fire. A lot of difficult political things. There was a Vietnam War, and yet there was a lot of really amazing art happening that was reflective of the time. I feel the same thing now, in terms of there is an opportunity. I mean, it's in some ways much more complicated than 1968 today. There is a similar kind of, up topsy turviness to the world, but there are things that are a little bit more difficult to navigate,
Mhm.
which makes it more important that art reflect the world in which we live, and that, as an artist, Chester and I have both tried to do that. The book came out, basically it's a movie it's based on Chester Brown's memoir, Paying for It, which charted his experiences paying for sex as a young guy in Toronto in the late 90s. And it was inspired. Chester and I were a couple, and I'm a big fan of I loved Chester Brown's comics before I knew him, and we met when I was on tour in Toronto, hit it off, fell in love, and then he moved to Vancouver to be with me, and then I got the gig at Much Music, and we returned to Toronto, and my life was very extroverted, interviewing celebrities and hanging out with bands and like playing shows, whereas Chester was really kind of he's a nerdy cartoonist. He wasn't so sociable. So I'd drag him out to concerts, and there he would be, in the corner with his nose in a book. So essentially our interests were drifting, like a lot of young people in Vancouver who, they had open relationships. I
Mhm.
developed a crush on somebody, and I didn't want to cheat on Chester. So I made a proposal. I said, hey, do you want to try opening our relationship up? And he's a freedom loving person, and he also loves to respects people's freedoms as well. And so he said he could recognize that was something that I wanted, and he said sure. And so I went perilously dating, and then Chester was celibate for a long time until it was unsustainable, and then he decided to pay for sex, which became the inspiration of his graphic novel. And he wrote about what he witnessed, and that was a complete lack of rights afforded sex workers, which puts them in harm's way.
Mm.
So, when the book came out, it was a polemic for the decriminalization of sex work. And when I read it, by then we were no longer romantic. And I read it and I thought it was a very bold and brave book. I appreciated, he had copious notes at the back, academic, historic ideas in his appendices in the back. And one of the strongest things that he wrote about was like drawing the parallel between queer liberation. Back in the 80s, if you were a gay guy at a steam house with other gay guys, the police raided it and you would be arrested and put into jail. So we've come a long way since there. It's now gay marriage is legal, and it's not criminalized. Oddly enough, in 2025, we can see our neighbors south of the border, those rights that we kind of took it for granted are being stripped away. So it's like this weird pendulum swing. But at the time, I was like, when I read it, I thought it had everything to do with human rights.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked him if I could turn it into a movie. And he said, sure, because he liked my movies and he trusted me to deliver the right way. And so I began to, I'll turn my thing on. My first iteration was a verbatim transcript of his book. And it was terrible. Chester and I read it and we were like, oh my God, it was awful. He's like, give up, Sook-Yin. This is not a movie. Movies and comics are very different. His was very episodic. Mm-hmm. And very didactic. And he didn't reveal a whole lot about the sex workers because he was protecting their privacy. And I'm a character in the book, but I'm only there in the beginning, offering the inciting incident when I say, hey, can we open up the relationship, which jettisons him on his journey. But it's very myopically from his perspective as a person who pays for sex. But I wanted for the movie to bring the sex workers to life, and I didn't want to just be contained within Chester's POV. And I also wanted to kind of challenge his assertions and kind of spar. I didn't want to slam dunk. I wanted to mess around with it a bit.
Yeah.
And so I tried many iterations for the better part of many years, and it was frustrating. I locked it away sometimes and made other films instead. And it wasn't until I noticed upon reading it for the umpteenth time a detail that he had seen a sex worker on my birthday. And I was like, oh, the old pang of jealousy came out. And I realized there's all this stuff that was happening in our lives that isn't in the book. So I had to reframe and kind of expand his canvas to include a bunch of stuff that was happening between us, a couple that stays together, makes very different choices, her dating, him paying for sex, and yet they navigate their relationship with one another. And so when I decided to add those things, I was like, do you mind if I add all this? He's like, do you really want to? I'm like, I think this will make it work. Another assertion that he had in his book was like a very strong idea was challenging the notion of possessive romantic monogamy. Now that's the kind of love that most of us conform to. I'm going out with you, you go out with me, I have sex with you only have sex with me till death do us part, or we divorce.
Right.
So in his book, he was wondering, is that the most loving thing to do? Or is unconditional love and supporting your partner with whatever they, wish, so long as they're not hurting anyone, isn't that a better one to strive for? And yes, unconditional love is the better one, but it is hard because we are all very, very protective, and we're very fearful, and we're very, possessive. So I really love that. I could mess around with that idea if I included our relationship. So I turned it into that. And I didn't want to have I mean, the politics are important, and like to illuminate the sex workers' lives are important. But I didn't want it just to be a slam dunk. I wanted to ask questions and also challenge some of his assertions.
And I think that the thing that was most fascinating to me the first time I watched this movie back at TIFF 2024 um, was that this is, as you kind of already alluded to, this is essentially like a dual memoir because you're adapting
Yeah,
a memoir, but you're adapting it as a main character of that memoir. And I have to say, I actually I got to find the right bookmark in the book here. Um, your style, I have to say, is very, very different from Chester's.
yes.
Because, for example, here's one chapter, and I went out of my way to pick the shortest chapter. But Kitty, April 2002. I thought I was going to see Jenna again, but this girl Kitty has been getting really good reviews, and she's a lot less expensive than Jenna. I saw Kitty on April 10th. Panel of the two of them having sex. She was nice, but not as attractive as Jenna and not as good sexually. That's the whole chapter. It's very I went to a place, I did a thing, next chapter. Where even in the shortest encounter in your film, there's a lot of I mean it's a different medium, so a lot more of that personality of even just the actors is going to come through. And I thought that one thing that I noticed right away is how much personality the sex workers get in this film just by being portrayed by actors.
Well, here's the thing: is Chester's comic is episodic.
Hmm.
He sees 52 sex workers. I couldn't make a movie like that. It's a
Right.
long, lot. You never get to the story. So
Hmm.
I had to distill it, just like I distilled his copious appendices notes to the three most important that resonated with me. And so I kind of distilled down the most important, I felt, growth moments for Chester.
Hmm.
He's very logical and detached. He's pragmatic. He's fair minded and humanistic, and he's like a very fair minded person and a good person. But he's got a kind of detached manner. He's cool. He's more Bresson.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm hot-headed and I'm emotional. And I want to tell a story about, flawed people undergoing a transformation. When I said that to Chester, he's like, "But I have no flaws." So he's like, "Oh God, not only is he not sharing any of the details with me, he sees himself as perfect." So like, yeah, we're very different. It's this movie is part him, part me. It's a double act of portraiture. I did have to distill the book down to what I felt was Chester's development, you
Hmm.
know, and I had to imagine in the lack of what he would share because he was protecting their identities. I interviewed sex workers. I did my due diligence and in research. I gleaned clues from the source material. I let that play with my imagination, and then I brought myself to it. So that's how it was able. I mean, I was very nervous to bring it to the comic book community because they're very tight, and they Chris Oliveros has started drawing him quarterly.
Hmm.
Brilliant person, and essentially started an entire genre of graphic novels. I was very nervous when I was in Montreal, and he loved the movie. He said he thought it was the best film about a cartoonist because too many times people will try to be so sacred to the book and try to do it exactly like the book. But here I am having experienced. It's not like I'm detached from it. I know a whole. I can only add a more of a dimension to his story,
Hmm.
because I lived through it too.
Speaking of the comic book community, another thing that I really liked in this movie is how you portray Toronto from the past. I'm relatively new to Toronto. I moved here, I want to say 4 years ago. So I wasn't here during the events of the movie. But what I see in this movie and in a couple other movies like Young Werther from I think the same year of TIFF, is just a love for the city. And I really see that in this. I notice a lot of landmarks. There's a point where he's walking down Spadina, and like I go there almost every day. And early on in the movie, you're wearing your character, I guess Sunny, is wearing a Mystic Muffin T-shirt. I
Yeah.
live like a block away from Mystic Muffin. Um, but one thing, so I'm I loved that love for Toronto comes through. And another thing that I noticed that I haven't seen in a lot of other movies is like specifically talking about Toronto Comic Con. I don't know if it's a specific Comic Con, but early on in the movie, Chester and his other cartoonist friends go to a comic convention, and they go to that, I want to say 3 or 4 times during the movie, and you see how this Comic Con, or how like comic culture in Toronto evolves throughout that time, to the point where, I mean, this is no longer in the movie, but Toronto Comic Con happens here yearly, and it is a giant event. Which, early in the movie, it's barely out of someone's basement. It's not in the basement anymore. They clearly got a venue, but it's like it's not much of a venue. And then by the end, they're almost getting pushed out of their own Comic Con because it's so big of a thing.
Yes. Yeah, I was trying to incorporate all kinds of ideas. So it's deceptively on the surface a sweethearted and tender film, but there is a chock-a-block full of things existing underneath. One of the ideas I wanted to address was that changing culture. At Much Music, when I was a VJ, when I started, it was like a free for all. You could do
Mhm.
anything. I did lots of social experiments, doing lots of weird stuff, never scripted. And then gradually, as it became more and more corporate, I was asked to do kind of yucky things like the Colgate DJ challenge. So seeing that kind of live rock and roll, live television sort of become highly corporatized. The same sort of development in the kind of like gentrification of our cities. So even seeing cranes demolishing buildings, you get a sense of the next thing that's coming. And also the same parallel between that sweet kind of like scrappy underground zine culture, underground, like Chester used to sell his comics on the street holding it up,
Mhm.
and then he was the toast of the comic world. And then it was always the comics were always in peril of the industry collapsing. But then Chris Oliveros came up with the idea of the graphic novel and a collected book that could be sold in bookstores, and suddenly it's like they're superstars. And then always superheroes were always encroaching for shelf space, and then that became huge. So really trying to comment on culture and the kind of development. And it's not only dire, though. It's not just a highly corporatized leeching of the soul, because different anomalies happen. You see, one of the cartoonists, she's all the guys get all the biggest lines. No one's
Mhm.
no one's no one's going to her line. And then we later she's the toast of she's the biggest star at the later one, because as similarly, publishing in comics, some of the brightest superstars are women now.
Mhm.
So there's always new things bubbling up, things kind of becoming not as great, things going great. It's always mutating and changing. And getting back to the idea of like portraying the Toronto that I love, and I mean it's a period piece. And so I essentially cast all the locations like actors, and much like a documentarian. So the brothel is real. We shot in my house where the real life events occurred. I shot in my friend's house because I said their apartment on Spadina. I'm like, guys, this looks like a brothel. And they said, yeah, I think it is, because people still knock at the door asking if Lips still works there. And I was like, I knew it. So, and then I, shot in my friends' places around the neighborhood in Kensington Market, restaurants, art galleries, you name it. I called up Moses Neimer, who hired me at Much Music, and he let me into his TV station on the weekend. So these places exude an authenticity. And same with the actors who play the sex worker roles. All of them have a nuanced understanding of sex work. They're musicians and stand-up comedians and political activists. There are filmmakers who deal with sex work in their own movies. So really, finding people that could elevate the material and tell me if I was ever off track.
Mhm.
They could tweak their they would tell me if what was working and what wasn't working. One actor changed her wardrobe and it made sense. So Yeah, just like and all the music, drawing upon my peers who were making groundbreaking indie rock and hip hop back in the day, asking them for their videos. And production wise, that does a lot of heavy lifting because they're of the era. And
Mhm.
so when you see those music videos, and I just called on my peers, my friends who I knew know through the years. So it was really galvanizing a community effort, intergenerational community right across Canada, and geographically in my neighborhood and friend group.
Um, so when you were talking about casting the sex workers, I wanted to jump to a few of the questions about the casting, and the main one that I wanted to talk about is Andrea Werhun, who
Yeah.
plays Ulissa in this. I believe it's a role that in the book is called Denise.
Well,
And oh,
yes. Yeah.
oh no, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
But she's
Um,
also Denise too, because she says she's Ulissa in the book, and then later says her real name is Denise. So I did that,
oh,
copy that too.
gotcha. I'm sorry. I must have slightly missed it during my last rewatch.
That's okay.
Um, but Andrea Werhun, of course, some people may know this. She had a movie that premiered at TIFF last year called Modern Horror, which I believe is getting a release in Canada. It it's getting a release in Canada soon. I thought it was January. It might be February or March. I will look for that for sure. But I wanted to ask about how how you met Andrea.
Yeah, so Andrea and Chester have worked together. He did the poster for her short film Modern Horror.
Mhm.
He's a big fan of Chester. A lot of his book inspired her to write Modern Horror. So they have a working relationship. So it seemed like a natural fit.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, you want establishing relationships, or those are very important. And so, yeah, it made all the sense in the world to work with Andrea because she has that history with Chester. And yeah, and also have the insight of both Chester and Andrea in terms of sharing the script with them, making sure that I was, on the right track. And so that was very, very helpful. Andrea, this is her first feature film role. And when she's doing her own stuff, she's got a very different style, very, very big and very
Mhm.
kind of, you know, um, she has a very broad sensibility. Here, I was asking her to do something very much more real, and with just a couple of, there were a few people, Hania Cheng and Andrea. They all of them deliver incredible performances, but I think that what is the hallmark of a great actor is they're just smart people. And
Mhm.
so Hania similarly came in. She's a musician. They had never been in a movie before. And I wanted to work with them because they're awesome. But they came in and did like a very big thing. And, I said, okay, you're a musician. You're at 10 right now. Go bring it down to one. Right away, they could incorporate that direction and then do a brilliant performance. In an extremely difficult situation where I was trying to get a oneer for the whole scene,
Mhm.
no cutting. And same with Andrea, just give her a couple of directions and really ran with it. So, you know, very, very, very wonderful performances.
Is Hania the person who plays Amy?
And
Sorry.
she plays Anne.
Oh, Anne. Yes. Okay. Anne is Amanda's friend. Yes. Okay. Cool. I remember for now. So actually, on the mention of casting, there were two other people specifically I wanted to ask about. One of them I think may possibly be shorter, so I'll ask about him first. Uh, I was very interested in the casting of Chris Sandiford as, I want to say his character in the
Kane?
movie's name is Kane. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's right.
Is he based on the character of Seth from the novel?
He's inspired by.
Inspired by,
So,
yes.
Seth was very clear from the get go that he didn't want a character named Seth or
Yes.
anybody like him.
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay. And so I met Chris Sandiford during karaoke in my neighborhood.
Oh, cool.
at Handlebar. Great karaoke singer, funny person. I met him also through Becky Johnson, who plays one of the sex workers, Tina,
Mhm.
and loved him. Saw Chris's work in the vampire TV show. That's really funny, and he's a great comic mind. And he was able to portray a kind of like quality that Seth has. Um, Very erudite and kind of like um, loves to wear old timey stuff. He Seth, Joe, and Chester have a very close, but they bug each other. These
Mhm.
peers make fun of each other constantly. They love each other dearly, but they also take the piss out of each other. And that's what they were doing to Chester. And in his book and in reality, they could not understand why he was making those life choices. So Chris had this quality that was very much to me calling to mind what I was trying to, the qualities of Seth that I was inspired by. I was again very nervous to have Seth look at it. He's very, very critical.
Mhm.
Seth loved it. He saw it in Guelph, finally. And when the lights came up, his eyes were full of tears. And he loved it. He was like, he was perfect. He was perfect. And so, yeah, I was really happy about that. But, um, yeah, you just kind of cast, and I cast what I felt was the person that kind of landed the spirit that I was looking for.
Yeah, because I noticed, I remember in the book, Chris has he's got one scene that's relatively short, because all the scenes in the book are relatively short, but he's got one scene where he really pushes back against um I want to say at that time the worldview that Chester is espousing to his friends,
Mhm.
and Chester points out in his appendices that Seth was the only one um, that he asked before he published this book. He asked everyone who appeared in it if they wanted to make any comments, and Seth was the only one who took him up on that. So I noticed that Seth was a very important person in this book, and I just I wanted to know about how Chris Sandiford came into that role.
Yeah,
Um,
and similarly, it's like Chester granted me the ability to make that film or the rights to do it, but he's not a filmmaker and he's not interested in making films. So, as soon as he did let me do that, I kind of ran with it. So he had no say on the casting or anything like that. And he was very, very helpful on set. He drew tons of stories, tons of drawings, and let me shoot in his apartment, and was like so happy to be there on the comic sort of con scenes. Yeah, it's I think it all worked out well, and phew, I breathed a sigh of relief because I wanted him to be happy with it.
well, I have lots more questions to ask, but I think we are pretty close to out of time. So I want to respect that. Thank you so much, Sook-Yin Lee, for coming on the show. And I strongly recommend paying for it to anyone who, has listened to this somehow without seeing it. Go watch it. It's in the Quad Cinema on January 30th, which
Yeah,
is,
it's basically here. I'll give you the rundown for
please do.
listeners. I'm taking it to the United States. Chester is coming with me as well. We're at Quad Cinema in New York City. It's right in Greenwich Village. It's been around since 1972. That's a staying power for an art house cinema. It opens January 30th, and our Q&A moderator is John Lee, who's a great comic mind. On January 31st, Saturday, 7:30, Elliot Page doing the moderation. And then on February 1st, Jordan Tannehill, also from Toronto, is doing the moderation. And then it goes for a week there. And then we head to Los Angeles, and we do preview screenings on February 3rd and 4th through Lamelie, I think is the chain store, or the theater, Lameline. if you go to their website, and that starts February 3rd and 4th. Chandler Levac, Toronto-based filmmaker who has relocated to LA, is doing the February 3rd Q&A, and Mae Martin is doing the February 4th Q&A. We're doing signings, local signings at comic book stores as well. And then on February 6th, the actual legit run opens in Chester, and I will be introducing the film. And then I've just found out today that they want to send us to Chicago as well.
Oh, nice. I have a lot of friends in Chicago, so I will make sure to promote it to them too.
We're going to try to get Chris Ware out to see if he'll moderate. He's a really great cartoonist in Chicago.
That would be awesome. And go. And anyone who's listening, go to these screenings. If you've seen the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, go to these screenings. I went to one last year in Toronto at the Scotiabank Theatre where you and Chester were both there. And you come out and do an intro, and then afterwards you come out for Q&A, and you kind of stick around as long as people, as long as people have questions and as long as you guys are able to be there.
Yeah.
It was a really great experience. So
yeah,
highly recommend.
It's a grassroots operation. It's a bit like a circus sideshow. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm excited to bring it to America.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sook-Yin Lee. This has been another episode of ContraZoom Pod. Hopefully this comes out. This should be out very, very soon, well before January 30th.
Good stuff.
Everyone should be able to hear about it.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Huge thank you again to Jeff Ballmer for conducting this interview and to Sook-Yin Lee for coming on the show. That was a fantastic listen, and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. If you haven't seen Paying for It yet, I highly recommend it. As you heard, the great conversation that was had and a very interesting film. So please do check it out if you haven't yet. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at ContraZoomPod. What are your thoughts on the interview that we just had? Especially the fact that it was a video interview. Leave us a comment on Spotify or send an email. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen and watch podcasts on YouTube, we post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.